Hey, how's it going? It's Ashrith from Beatworx, and I'm back once again for another video based around restrictions. And this time, I've made a full track using just a kick. Let's hear what you're about to learn. Now, how exactly did I do that? And what is the thought process behind this? My thought process is really simple when it comes to restrictions. What can I do with as little as possible and juice the most out of it and get the best out of it? So let me explain what I've done here. So I've obviously got a kick from the 909 core kit, and I've made 6 return tracks, as you can see on the screen. And these 6 return tracks, each one is producing a different sound through the kick. Let me enable my sends over here so you can see how I've sent this kick into all these 6 return tracks and at full volume. Let's hear them one by one. So I've got a sub bass on this track here. I've got a bass on this track. I've got a hi-hat on track C. I've got another hi-hat, but a faster one that's playing all 16th notes on return track D. And I've even gone to the length of making a ride or a cymbal on track E. And I've got this really cool synth that I've made using track F. Now let's hear it again all together. It's quite responsive in the way that if I turn up the high pass filter, all the sounds start to change a little bit. And then when I pull it back down, it goes back to where it was. Now, let me explain the entire process behind this and break it down element by element. So obviously, I've got a kick that's playing a 4 to the floor pattern like this. And then when I go over to the sub return track, you can see I've got a hybrid reverb that's exclusively playing the algorithm. And then it goes through an amp simulator and then goes through an auto filter just to hold back all the frequencies that I don't want. So let's just give this a listen. I'll put off the amp, I'll put off the auto filter, and I've got a simple sidechain compressor. So this is what hybrid reverb is generating. Then goes through the amp, and the amp sort of really destroys the sound and makes it like quite big. And then I'm holding all of that back with the auto filter, with the aim that I don't want anything but just the sub bass. This is just your typical techno rumble, as you would call it. And on track B, something really interesting is happening, which is it's going through a delay first. Let's go ahead and switch off all these effects. As you can see, I've got a whole bunch of effects on track B. I've switched off everything else except the delay. So we get the kick to delay in this way, then goes through an amp again for some crunching up, then goes through the spectral resonator. Now the amp is very crucial here because it feeds the spectral resonator a very nice sound that it can take and generate an even better sound. This goes through another delay, and I've also got an LFO that's mapped to control the decay of the spectral resonator. As you can see, I've set the rate to a 3/8, very little depth. It's offset mostly the left, and I've got a bit of jitter on there as well. So the jitter helps this knob not repeat the modulation in the exact same fashion. And since I've generated a sub bass, I didn't really want bass out of this sound. So I've just decided to cut it out with an EQ. And then this goes through a compressor and then a sidechain. Maybe the sidechain is a bit hard on this. So let's just dial that back a little bit. Now, the reason why I've used a compressor here is I might actually go ahead later on when I arrange this track and play around with the shift. And when I do this, the dynamics of the sound change. Sound gets louder. So let's just go ahead and fold these devices so we can see the compressor while I do the shift. You can see there's a hotter signal being fed into the compressor when I turn up the shift. I might even use some of the other modulations like the harmonics here, very nice. Maybe even dampen the high frequencies a little lesser later on, and so on. Moving on, we have a very simple hi-hat over here. How did I generate this? It's very, very simple. So the vocoder, that's the built-in audio effect over here, is able to like use a noise as a carrier and apply that texture onto any sound that's coming in. So I've got a delay that's offsetting the kick, and it's playing it in between every kick. So say on the 8th note away from the kick. This then goes through a vocoder, and I've set the bands to 4, and I've dipped down these bands because I don't really need those frequencies. The frequencies of a hi-hat are just over here in these 2 bands. Moving on. Sending it through an overdrive just to crunch it up a little bit, then into an EQ just to get rid of any frequencies that I don't want, and then through a glue compressor just to level it and make it sound polished. Next, over here in track D, we have these 16th hats that are being generated. Again through a vocoder, but you can see there's a filter delay here, pre-vocoder. This is generating the groove, otherwise it's just going to be the kick coming in and then going into the vocoder. So I've got the filter delay generating this really quick pattern that's playing 16th notes, then goes through a vocoder. Again, you can see I've used very limited number of bands, and I've also used the format here. This is something I might even modulate or automate later on, but let's just go back to where it was. And I've also used the depth control to set it to the least, so it gives me this kind of texture instead of the usual texture on 100, and the release is all the way down as well, which is also something I might play with later on. And then of course this all goes through an EQ and gets shaped. Maybe I might even do a bit of a high cut on that. Now another interesting sound we have here is a cymbal. How did I generate that? So this is based on the same theory as the 8th hat that we just saw. So I'm using a delay to offset and play it in between every kick on the 8th note. And I've used it on a ping pong mode, but I found that the width was a bit too much. So I'm using a utility to bring down the width and control the stereo field. All this goes through a corpus, which is on the membrane mode and on the high mode as well. And the tuning is something I played around with. Now, I wanted the feeling of a cymbal, right? A cymbal has this very resonant sort of a frequency in it, and I was able to emulate that with corpus. Just another few settings here, and I didn't want it to sound very tonal, so I turned down the drive-at. Then this goes through an amp just to bring up the frequencies just a little bit. Goes through erosion to add a little bit of texture and noise. And then a filter that's being modulated with an LFO. And then of course the EQ. So if you notice, when I take the EQ off, there's a bit of the kick bleeding in here, which doesn't really make a difference because I'm cutting it away anyway. And notice here is where those resonant frequencies are, which makes it sound like a true cymbal. And of course, there's a sidechain that's just making a pocket for the kick. Moving on. Here on track F, which I've aptly named UFO, is one of the most interesting sounds in this track. So I've got this preset called Drum Reso Gate of Corpus. Let's in fact switch off all of this and just listen to the sound that comes out of Corpus. So that's the sound coming out of corpus. There's an LFO here that's playing at a specific rate, and that's changing the tuning of corpus, and it's producing this movement in pitch. And by default, the preset actually has the LFO on a square, but I decided to change it to a saw up instead. And that gives me this kind of a feel rather than one that goes just up and down. So there's a sense of smoothness over here. This goes through an overdrive, and I've also mapped the LFO to control this filter on corpus. All this then goes through a delay. If you notice, the delay is adding a lot to the sound, and also that is set in ping pong mode. All of this goes through an EQ just to make sure none of those harsh frequencies exist. In fact, I'm going to just tone down the highs as well. And finally, through a compressor. Now, once again, let's hear it all together. I'm really happy with this result, and I think I've managed to put together an entire track using just one sound. Now, this is the beauty of restrictions, and trust me, it works wonders. Now, I wouldn't have been able to do this if I told myself I have absolutely no restrictions and I'm going to use maybe synthesizers or samples to design these sounds. Maybe I would have just been stuck browsing through a bunch of kicks or a bunch of presets or trying to synthesize sounds from scratch. But this approach gave me quicker results, and it was way more fun. Now, I have done a few other things as well here. As you can see, I've enabled the sends on some of the return tracks on the 8th hat, the 16th hat, and the cymbal. And I can send these to the bass return track whenever I want to. And what that gives me is the ability to accentuate that bass every now and then. Maybe I go into a breakdown. I also have an auto filter on the master. Now, it works very differently when the filter's on the master versus when the filter is before the kick goes into all these return tracks. I quite like both of them. They both have a special place. Now, this is awesome. This is when I'm changing the filter here, pre-return tracks. It's changing the texture of the sound that's going into the return tracks and producing a completely different sound. Wow, that was just amazing, right? If you agree with me, click the like button, subscribe to our channel, and I also offer one-on-one mentorship with Beatworx, and we have a bunch of online and offline courses as well. So do consider signing up for one of them if you're interested. And I hope you enjoyed watching this tutorial, and stay tuned for more.